Okay, so this for me, the big challenge here is not summarizing, because a ton of good material has been presented in the last couple of days. To me, the challenge is different audiences. We have some people who've been here for 2 days and they heard everything that I heard, and other people who haven't been here for 2 days and they don't need to hear all the details. So I'm going to keep it pretty general, and I'll invite everybody who has an opinion about some of the things that we've been saying that they thought were important that I don't say now, which is probably most of the things, to please chip in after I give this sort of high-level summary. So I have no idea how long we have listed, but I think we'd agreed I'm unlikely to talk for 30 minutes. So please be thinking about what you wanted to highlight that you think is important to communicate, especially to the people who were not here for 2 days. So in a way, the way I try to think about what are we doing here, and I think today I think we're doing reconciling analysis and reality. We've been spending 2 days on how do we do better analysis, and today I hope we learn about how would we improve it in terms of making it useful for real situations and also communicate it to people who have to make real policy. So since we have different folks in the room and people who have played different roles, to me, what I was thinking about, what's the role for the evaluator and what's the role for the evaluated in generating goods impacts information? And I should say that's not people, that's roles. We have people in the room who have been in both roles, and we have people who will be in both roles. Sometimes you're a policy designer, a policy maker, and sometimes you're a policy evaluator. So I hope we can all see each other, at least in the evaluating role, whatever role we're doing now. Okay, let's try again. There we go. Can you see that? Something has happened. It doesn't look like it did on my machine quite. But anyway, that's all right. I think it's that this thing spilled over line, so it's lower than I thought. And anyway, it's just okay. So I think there's what I try to think is, what are the presumptions of people like me who mostly just are on the analysis side? I'm not a policymaker. I haven't been, may never be. And I think my main assumption is that impact knowledge can aid policy. And I tried to unpack that a little bit and say, I think there's a lot of reasons why we see the policies we see. And we know that. And I know that I don't know what those reasons are. And I think I think that not all policies are definitely yielding changes on their stated goals. So that's an underlying assumption I have, and if we want to challenge that, that's fine, but I think that's where I start. And then I also think that I'm assuming that it's possible to learn beyond what I knew before by studying data. So, and I think that learning could guide changes in policies. All those could be challenged. I've met plenty of people who think they already know whether something works or not, and it's not going to help if we look at data. But so my presumptions, and I think the presumptions of the last 2 days are, I know there's a lot of reasons why there's policies. Not all policies actually advance every goal, and we could learn about whether they did. So I think that's where I start. But then I think there's the natural questions. Do I need to hear from an impact evaluator? Do I even want to hear? And I think I thought of that in 2 ways. One, I'm pretty sure I know this is working. I think you hear that a lot. And that may actually be true. It could easily be that the policymaker knows way better than anyone with limited data whether it's working. But I also think there's plenty of good examples in the world where people seem to have thought things were working, and upon closer inspection, maybe they weren't. So I think that is a category that's out there. And then the other thing, this was highlighted yesterday, is we might get stuck on a stated goal, and there might be 73 goals that are actually behind the policy. And that's understandable. So we're limited to saying, these are the goals we can comment on, and we have to try to convince someone that if they care about it, then our evidence is relevant. So I do see there's some need that we need to take our presumptions and communicate them to someone who makes policy. And so what do I think are the roles for us today? On the evaluator side, I think we need to keep communicating why you need to test impact. As much as the people here the last 2 days, we all agree, I think we've heard from, I think a lot of us know that there's not a presumption that people need impact evaluation. As much as we want to get into the fanciness of it, I think Paul, lots of interventions have communicated that not everyone is convinced they need to do this. And then what we've really been trying to do together as a group is keep improving those habits. So we'll try to convince people that we are improving the ability to comment on, did a policy have impact? But I think there's roles for the people who have been policymakers and will be policymakers. I think if they have doubts, and they've been kind enough to come here, communicate those doubts about impact testing. Tell us why you don't believe it. Tell us what would convince you. And then the communication is, what information do you need? Maybe you're convinced that we provided some information, but you don't care about it. You want other information. So I'm delighted that people have come to say what are their experiences, and those are the things I would love to hear. Why do you not want impact, and which impact do you want? So that would be a great conversation. I would love to find out why what I'm doing is irrelevant so I could do something different. Okay, I'll just say that I think we have converged as a room. We come from different backgrounds on a very core approach to testing. I hope it's defensible. I've put it in its most high-level form. So if you don't like this, then it's good to discuss, because everything we've done is under this, I think, basic setup. First, I think this meeting has been very good, in my opinion, about stressing an understanding of the setting. I think it's very easy to grab data, push data around. I think it's actually getting a little bit scary that you can get any student to grab a data set, put it in software, hit go, come out with numbers, and then proclaim truth. I can tell you, for instance, at Duke, we've had an issue where master's students who really weren't being overseen did a project, sent it to someone in the legislature, and argued for an education policy, and there's now citations in actual policy that a lot of people don't agree with that cite the Duke study. And there's a lot of Duke professors who don't think that was even a study. It was some form of, punching buttons on a computer. And I think that tells us also that we don't put information out into an agendaless world, right? So when we put information out, it's going to get used for the agendas that are already out there. So I would say that violated understanding setting. Those students had 2 months to do a project. They did not go to the field. They did not talk with educators. They did not talk to policymakers in education on the ground. And I think this room really wants to start with a very good understanding of the setting we're talking about. And again, coming to today then, it'd be interesting to hear from the people who are in these settings what they think people don't get. Like, here's what I was trying to do, and all these evaluators came and they told me I didn't understand. But the evaluators didn't get this. That would be a useful thing to hear, because we need to know what we tend to get wrong about understanding the setting. So we want to communicate with the people who design the policy, and we want to be on the ground with some sense of who is on the ground, what do they do, why do they do it. And I think this room agrees on that, but I'd love to hear from people in practice whether that's what they've perceived, or do they perceive impact evaluation to be people coming from the outside with numbers who know nothing about me? Because if that's true, we're failing. And we actually know we fail in that way some ways, and so this part of what we're trying to improve is to do that better. And then I think we had a nice phrasing by sort of convergence. After you kind of understand the basic setting, we need to lay out a theory of change through policy. Like, do you understand why the world looks like it does now? And we don't always do a good job at that. And given that you understand that, can you tell a consistent story about why the policy you are going to do might ever change something, and in which direction? And I think we really want to emphasize, there's a lot of theory you can have, but can you take an argument about why we see what we see, and given that, why things would change? And that is an incredibly general request that we as evaluators should do better on. And again, in talking to the people who are practitioners, I think a lot of that can come in communication between practitioner and evaluator. And then I think we've said, not only do those things of understanding and theory of change via policy lead to ideas to do evaluation, they could even lead to ideas for designing the policy before you evaluate it. I think we all agree there's not enough evidence for a lot of policies that we try. And we should get more evidence. But we could also just try policies in situations they might be expected to work, and not waste our resources in situations where they wouldn't be expected to work, and then we'll all conclude they were terrible when they could have worked in other settings. I think that's, to me, that's somewhat of a summary of where we were at the end of yesterday. And here we now have the Rainbow Coalition. We are open to all views and perspectives, but what I have heard, and I tried to adjust this a little bit from what I've heard, is on improving habits. And this is partly for the room and partly for the last 2 days. I think these are ways we've tried to say that we can improve impacts knowledge, and we'd like feedback. One, and I just think it's crucial, we have to ask the impact question. I just think there's so many policies where we don't ask, does this have impact? Compared to what? The compared to what is really important. And when you look back, I think Paul's phrasing is very nice. When you say, did this have impact? And the nice question is, maybe this had impact, but is there another story that would explain the same outcome? And can we argue that it was the policy that created what we see? And can we use data to show that it wasn't something else? That's another way of stating the impact question. I think the rule out competing explanations is one version of what we do. You see something and you try to explain it. Was it the policy or was it something else? I think is a good, simple question. I should say that now that randomized control trials are getting more accepted out in the world, and you can see why, but I think this room sees why that's valuable, but also that it's not the only thing that's valuable. We're working hard on improving our non-randomized control trial testing habits. That's a lot of what we've been discussing in these rooms. How do we do better when we didn't do a randomized control trial? I think we want to emphasize heterogeneous impacts. Maybe the easiest, that sounds like such a technical term. A very easy defense for that is if you care at all about equity, fairness, distribution, we often want to know what are the impacts on one group, could be richer, other groups could be poorer, or could be different regions. And many, many times, impacts on different groups are going to matter. And we've had some very good cautions about it's harder to do that, but we have very good motivations to do it. So we're going to try to do better and not do sloppy work on getting different impacts on different groups. I think we want to be complete, and we're working on being more complete on the various mechanisms by which a policy could have impact. If we only think of route 1 and route 2, but actually routes 3, 4, and 5 are the way the policy has impact, 1, we won't understand what it did. 2, we won't design the policy right. So that's been a theme for improving our testing habits. And then just to signal that we also just want to get ideas out, but we're worried some of the theory-based policy evaluation in the sense of I don't need numbers, all I need is ideas. On the one hand, we think these ideas and understanding are really important. On the other hand, almost always there's multiple possible ideas. And I think that brings us back to the data. What I think we've said is enunciate your idea clearly. If someone else has a different idea, comparing them should lead to the best, most efficient way to test which is right. I think that's where we were. Okay, and finally, we really only have one approach. It's that basic general approach. Understand setting. Have a theory about change versus policy. Do it with people who are doing the policy making. Improve it. That's really, we only have one approach, but it applies in a ton of ways. It can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, it should be a mix of both. It can be randomization, it can be not. That's not the issue. It's have a theory, be in communication, try to rule out competing explanations. We have a method and it's very general, and we hope that anyone who believes that it's not applicable, we could convince it could be. And there's tons of worldviews that get used. Economic theory, governance theory, psychological theory, underlying biology of eco-service provision. There's a lot of different theories that come in. There's no view that doesn't belong here if it's relevant to what happens in the world. So I think it's a very big tent. We're very focused on measuring impact, but in a lot of settings and in a lot of ways. And most of all, for me, the segue to today is it's done much better when the evaluator and the evaluated are talking, as I hope is going to happen for the rest of today. So, thank you.